pledge allegiance Next, we'll have a roll call.
Weiss?
Yes.
Bright? Waldron? Tao?
Yes.
Remy?
Yes. Then I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda unless someone has some changes they'd like to make.
So move.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Let's proceed to vote.
Bright? Waldron?
Yeah, it's just for the agenda.
Yes.
Tao?
Yes.
Weiss?
Yes.
Remy?
Yes. Next item is public participation. Anyone wanting to make a comment on anything that's not on the agenda. So if you're here for the public hearing, keep your comments for the public hearing, I guess. But if you're here not for the public hearing, you want to say something else, now would be the time to step to the podium. State your name. Oh. Oh, wait, sorry. Oh, yeah, we got to approve the minutes. I missed that part. From July 2nd, way back. Any comments or changes? Then I'd entertain a motion to.
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
I second. I second.
Got a motion and a second. Let's vote.
Tao?
Yes.
Weiss?
Yes.
Bright?
Yes.
Waldron?
Present.
Remy?
Yes. All right, now we can move on to the public participation. And when you're at the podium, make sure you press down and turn screen. Yes, sir. Wait a minute. Patrick, looking at this, it looks like it might pertain to the. Well, your name's not Patrick, so I'm talking to Patrick. Oh, to the public hearing.
May I speak for just a
Well,
minute?
no, why don't you wait for the public hearing then?
I'd like to ask you about the procedure, not necessarily for this instance.
Well, you passed this out, which leads me to believe you're referring to
If
some.
you'd flip on the back, sir, it shows a specific process. I'm asking a question about the process, not about the elements that pertain to this case. But I would like the process explained because I've never been able to find anything in a year of investigation on this. My name is Charles Jeter. I reside out of state, but I have a membership at Four Corners Rifle Pistol, and I participate in this community since 1978.
I'll allow you to make comments to the commission once we start the timer. Who's got the timer over there? You're allowed 3 minutes for public participation?
I promise this will take only one.
Oh, there it is. Okay. Okay, go ahead.
First and foremost, thank you for your time. This image was printed in the story co-authored on Independent Log Company a year ago, but my question pertains to the process. Section 507J, which applies here, should logically apply to a grandfathered business use. And of course, I'm using that so everybody understands what it means. But legal non-conforming use is what I'm actually pertaining to. I would respectfully request that Nancy and Patrick make the case for the city about why we're looking at a non-conforming use not applying to the specifics right here, okay? 507J fits into the diagram that I have, since these two parcels are owned by the same party and were sold while owned by the same family previously, and the sawmill has a legal non-conforming use that is now seen in as industrial. So what I'm puzzled about and what I want to talk about is specifically how we're not seeing 507J applying to a non-conforming use. So I apologize for my brusqueness in saying that this is not pertaining specifically to your agenda item. However, if the logic fits that I present here, there should be an understanding of why the city has insisted on working around this issue instead of implementing it as a solution that does not require the time of the council or of the committee for planning and zoning. This should fit under the use by right that conveyed with the sawmill in the adjoining lot, which could also be used for accessory use as seen in the diagram. Okay, the reason I'm bringing this up is because everybody's affected by this that has a non-conforming use in the city. So that's why I think this is most important, and we should have a ruling about it on the public record from Nancy and from Patrick. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else here to comment on what's not on the agenda? Seeing none, let's move on to the public hearing. And process, Nancy, would you make your presentation, please?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I could do a little opening remark, just to remind the commission that this is a quasi-judicial hearing. We've given you information regarding quasi-judicial hearings, but the key thing to remember is this is a separate and unique application. So any evidence or testimony that you receive tonight should be the sole basis for your decision tonight, unless you continue the hearing to a later date, at which time the public hearing would actually be continued as well. But in any event, any information that was presented previously in any other applications related to this property or to any other property or any other applicant are not relevant to the discussion for tonight, and your decision should be based on what is presented tonight and what procedures have been undertaken relative to this application. And it is a singular application that is not related to any prior application. So I would caution you to avoid considering information that may have been presented at prior public hearings on a similar but different application related to this property or any other property or applicant. And with that, again, I would remind you that under the quasi-judicial hearing rules, you're required to only consider information that you receive during the public hearing, which is just getting ready to start. And if any commission member has received information prior tonight, you should disclose that. And if it's in writing, provide the written information to the clerk. If you verbally heard, hopefully you didn't have discussions about this item with the member of the public or the applicant. You're required to maintain a neutral position until you hear all the evidence and testimony. So if you have had any contact, those contacts are considered what they call ex parte communications, and you need to disclose anything and go into detail what you may have heard or what information you may have received prior to tonight. And again, would caution you, certainly it's late for this one, but as we've advised earlier, on a quasi-judicial hearing, you want to avoid and minimize ex parte contacts. And so with that, again, just leave you with that warning that the public hearing is tonight, and the information that you receive tonight is what you should base your decision on. Thank you.
Thank you. Has anyone received any discussion or information?
Just, Mr. Chairman, just to clarify something, we all did receive a packet prior to tonight.
Yes, and your packet is part of the record, so it is considered a part of the public hearing.
Anyone else have any? Yes, me neither. Okay, Nancy, would you make your presentation then?
Good evening. The request here tonight is for a conditional use permit and site plan for log home manufacturing, storage of wildland firefighting equipment, and firewood processing on a 10-acre parcel located at 1050 Lebanon Road. Let me show us the vicinity map. So the parcel in question is marked with the star right there. It's currently a vacant parcel, zoned commercial. It's previously been the site of the drive-in many, many years ago, and has been zoned commercially for many years also. The applicants are Anthony Moore and Mary Lancaster, which comprise Independent Log Company. They're here tonight, and they will have a very detailed presentation, I believe, from their attorney. I know that there's been a lot of discussion with this parcel. As Pat said, we're trying to focus here on the conditional use permit request and site plan request only for this property. Going into some of the background, I think you're going to hear tonight about some concerns of code violations on the property and history of that on the property. So at this point, I want to turn it over to Rachel Marchbanks, who's you could go the next one.
Okay, I have them right now.
Okay. Who will go over that history for you.
Okay, just to update you a little bit on that. So as the Community and Economic Development Director, I'm responsible for the leadership and overall supervision of city planning and the building department. As such, I administer and enforce the city's building and zoning codes and provide day-to-day managerial decisions on problems and issues that arise. It is also my duty to ensure that investigations occur when it comes to life, health, and safety issues as it pertains to land use. I work with my staff, our building officials and code enforcement personnel to help bring code infractions into compliance. We work closely with the police department and the fire protection district, as well as the county health department and child protective services and other organizations and agencies occasionally in the city. Just a little update, because this will come up. In April of 2023, we received complaints of potential hazardous waste on 1050 Lebanon Road. We take any allegations of toxic or hazardous waste seriously. I asked our code enforcement personnel to follow up. They in turn contacted the fire district, who investigated the situation, and it was determined that no hazardous waste was present, and we took no code enforcement action. Later in the summer, I received a phone call on a Saturday from our Parks and Rec director, who had received an urgent report of potential illegal dumping, trespassing, and property destruction on or near the same property. As a director, I do work on weekends and evenings as needed, like tonight, and as emergencies arise. After discussing the situation with our building official, I called non-emergency dispatch and requested an officer visit the property. Nothing was found, and we did not issue any code violations. On this property, We have had conversations with the applicants about possible code violations. As with any property in the city, our goal is to bring them into compliance, and we have been working with them on that. And currently, I'm sure it will be mentioned that their property is in very good shape. We did issue on 11/16/23 a courtesy notice, and on 11/27/23 we served them a violation notice. We cited some code infractions, including weeds, inoperative, unlicensed vehicles, junk, unpermitted contractor storage, and unpermitted open storage or materials or commodities. So that was done. And this part of this conditional use permit will help bring them into compliance. They have done a great job cleaning up this property and weeds and all of that. So we're not concerned at this time with any code violations.
Thanks, Rachel. So that is the reason in the past, recent past, you have seen uses on this property, but we ask you to consider tonight what the request is, review it on its merits, and not be concerned necessarily with previous uses or potential violations on the property. Could you go to the, next one. So this is a close-up of the parcel in question. As you can see, at the time this air photo was taken, it was vacant. You can almost see the remains of the drive-in on that property. It's largely open, adjacent directly to Lebanon Road, and the access road on the north that you see is the access to Carpenter Preserve and Trailhead.
Excuse me, Nancy, can I stop you a minute? Rachel, let's go back to make sure I heard you right, that there were a couple reports of code violations, but then as it was checked out that they both turned out to be bogus. And then later on the 16th, there was a courtesy notice sent and a violation sent, and they have since taken care of the violation. Is that what I heard you say?
Yes, most of the items have been taken care of. There's still, I think, a truck with logs on the property, as far as I know right now. They can probably let you know for sure. But that's what we're hoping to
Okay, I was just making sure I heard you right. Thank you. Sorry, Nancy, go ahead.
Well, I would clarify that the courtesy notice and the notice of violation were unrelated to the two reports of and of hazardous or toxic materials on the property. So those were investigated and found to be not having merit. There were additional violations that either were in existence or came into existence after the fact that the code enforcement process was initiated. And I would remind you that our code enforcement process is a three-step process. First, you get a courtesy notice, and that's when the code enforcement officer either mails, hand delivers, or personally talks to the property owner and advises them of what they believe is a code violation, and asks them to cure it. Usually, maybe 6 weeks later, if they haven't cured it or cleaned it up or whatever the violation is, then they will give them a formal notice of violation demanding that they clean it up or cure it. And a certain amount of time later, if no action is taken, they issue a summons which demands that the property owner appear in municipal court to answer to the violations. As far as I'm aware, no summons was ever issued in this case. It ended at the notice of violation.
So if the notice of violation, then the violation is taken care of, does the city ever get back to the person and say, we see that you've taken care of it? Or do they just do nothing?
We'll often send a thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry, Nancy.
Okay, are we back?
Yes, we are back.
Figure out where we were. As far as describing the use, I think I'm going to stop with the proposal for log home construction, the equipment storage, and firewood processing. They have a very detailed presentation. I know you've seen their detailed narrative. I'm going to let them go through that presentation to describe their use. I do, however, want to try and go over the site plan. I know that you all on the board have copies of it and can probably read that. It does have small text, and I'm concerned that no one in the audience will be able to understand the site plan and the proposal. So I'm going to try and talk us through that a little bit, and we'll see, and highlight the important features for you.
We did include a larger version of the site plan for each of you, and then also it's printed out and available to the public to review on the tables over there.
Okay, so the important things I want to point out on the site plan, you got it? Is the proposed buffer areas, which are 30 feet proposed along the Carpenter Access Road. There's two larger open space areas in these two corners, which are meant to buffer some drainage and drainage areas on the property. Another 30-foot buffer along the eastern edge of the property here. I just want to then highlight where the uses go. So this area in here, outside of the buffers, is for equipment storage and vehicle storage, mostly for the wildland firefighting portion of the property, which isn't always on the property. It depends when they're on call for a fire. There is nothing shown at the very front of the property adjacent to Lebanon Road. This rectangle I'm trying to outline there is, and I think I'll just read this, area where waste cuttings of logs is stored for firewood. Size of this operation varies depending on overall current log home construction needs. The larger, almost square shape here states general staging area for log home construction. This area will vary depending on number of log homes being fabricated, size of homes, and log stock required. A few other highlights of the site that you should be aware of is right along this line here is the Cortez Sanitation District line. They have an easement for that, and they have requested through this process that that access easement remain free and open from any proposed storage or other uses. They need to be able to get at that line. It's a main trunk line for service to the city. There is shown here a building envelope. This is future information only. It's a future warehouse building, but there's no plans at this time for construction of that site. We have the access coming in this area, and then 10 parking spaces proposed in that location. And I'm going to talk about those a little bit more later on. Go to the next. So let's go over why we're looking at conditional uses. The two uses that are clearly described in the code as being conditional in the commercial zone are, number one, I've got the definition up there for you, manufacturing of wood products, which is conditional in the commercial zone. It calls out log home manufacturing. There's probably some other uses in there, like the small-scale production of grade steaks or furniture that may or may not occur on the site. We'll let them talk about that. But it clearly states that log home manufacturing is a conditional use in the commercial zone. The other one that's clearly stated is the contractor equipment and storage yard. That's what we're calling their wildland firefighting storage area. They're a contractor in the forest. That is a listed use. It's listed as conditional in the zone. It's not necessarily defined in the code, so it's a term of art, and we've determined at the staff level that their use of the storage of equipment is contractor equipment and storage yard. Next one. So I'm going into some detail here on what your criteria are. Well, I skipped one. Firewood storage, yep. So firewood storage, which will likely be discussed quite a bit here tonight, is not a listed use in our code. We don't really even have any similar uses to that as to whether it's permitted use, conditional use, etc. It is here proposed with this development, with this application, as an accessory use to the log home manufacturing, and I think they'll talk about that quite a bit. The concern that staff has expressed with the firewood storage, however, has been from the site plan provisions of our land use code that state, and I've got it up there, it's about open storage. So the code states that there shall be no open storage of materials or commodities shall be permitted in any district except as an accessory use to a main use located in a building in an industrial or PUD industrial district. Then goes on to say no open storage operation shall be located in front of a main building. No wrecking, junk, or salvage yard shall be permitted as a storage use in any district. So the important parts about this are, number one, that this is an accessory use to a main use. But what's more important is it doesn't say you can't store materials or commodities, but it does say you can't have open storage of materials or commodities. A few other important things in there is that the no junk or salvage yard shall be permitted, which is part of why you'll see conditions on making sure that there be no junk stored on the property. And they have maintained that they won't store it, that all equipment will be operable and registered. So I wanted to go over that in quite a bit of detail because it's important to your consideration tonight and how you view this project.
So if I'm hearing you right, if it's stored in a building, it's okay?
Well, what we're going to ask you to help define is what's the definition of open storage. And we've got some suggestions coming up, and I'll go into that. But or maybe I'll just do it now. So in previous review of development, we have had discussions on open storage. What is it? It's not defined in the code. Several planning commissioners and city councilors in previous discussions posited that if storage was fenced, it wasn't open storage, which is where this sort of report and review went. The open storage provision in here is why we were concerned about whether or not this use fit in this zone district, because it says not permitted in any district except an I zone or PUD industrial or PUD industrial. However, if it's not open storage, it should be considered allowed as accessory to other uses in permitted uses or conditional uses in the commercial zone. Did I make that clear? I see confused faces.
Well,
We'll talk about it a little bit more coming up.
and the applicant will discuss the storage methods too? Okay.
Okay, so from there, I really wanted to focus in on the criteria for a conditional use permit. I've got them all spelled out in front of you. I don't know that we need to read them all, but I wanted to make sure everyone's really clear on what the criteria that these people are determining tonight, whether this use fits our code or not. So conditional use permit criteria, we have 6 of them. The first one is whether the proposed conditional use is compatible with adjacent existing uses and other uses in the zoning district. It then talks about how the compatibility can be expressed in terms of appearance, architectural scale and features, site design and scope, landscaping, as well as the control of adverse impacts, including noise, vibration, smoke, fumes, gas, dust, odor, lighting, glare, traffic, on and on, but more, and any other undesirable conditions. The next criteria is fairly similar to that, but it takes it to the next level. The proposed use has incorporated design features sufficient to protect adjacent uses, including but not limited to, and it goes on from there, but important here might be buffering, fencing, and perhaps future site building placement. Our next criteria talks about all proposed accessory uses. The one we're hearing, the one we'll hear a lot about tonight, I think, is the firewood storage and production. All proposed accessory uses must demonstrate that they are necessary and desirable, that they shall comply with the requirements of F1 and 2, which is the ones I just went over of this section, and that any undesirable impacts created by these uses shall be controlled or eliminated. The next criteria, which is probably the easiest one to address, that adequate public facilities such as streets, parking, water, sewer, etc., must be available without the reduction of services to other existing uses. Number 5 is that provisions for proper maintenance of the area shall be provided. And the last one is that the proposed conditional use shall conform to adopted plans, hours of operation, policies and requirements for parking and loading signs, access, and all other applicable regulations of this code and other applicable regulations. So I gave you some discussion on that. I think you're going to hear a lot more. The site is bounded on the north and partially on the east by city-owned open space, on the west by both industrial and commercially zoned land. South is both commercial and R1 residential. East is both the R1 residential and city open space. We talk a little bit about adjacent properties. The adjacent residential properties are at a significantly higher elevation than this property. I'm sure we're going to hear what the concerns from those neighbors might be. The adjacent commercial buildings to the south are vacant and have been for quite some time. The applicants own and operate a similar business immediately to the west. We've got fuel storage tanks located to the northwest and Superior Interiors, which is a retail operation with significant outdoor storage, is located to the southwest. Going over, I'll talk a little bit about the compatibility, and obviously this use is very similar in types of use, appearance, scope, landscaping, impacts to the uses located directly to the west across Lebanon Road, and even to the vacant commercial structures located to the south. Obviously, the areas that have raised the most amount of concern are the Carpenter Natural area and the single-family homes located on Ridge Drive that share a property line. We talked about what they're proposing, a 30-foot open space buffer along the north and east property lines. They have not technically proposed any buffer to the residential properties. However, there is a significant amount of land. I measured it at approximately 75 feet of open area where they were not proposing any uses at all. Let's now go to some of the site plan concerns. So if we go to surfacing, the land use code, and I quoted your sections in there, require that an access driveway have a durable, dust-free, all-weather surface. It states the acceptable materials, concrete, asphalt, etc., and it also has some unacceptable materials that include gravel. The applicant's site plan submitted by their engineer, shows that the access drive would be gravel, and the parking is proposed to be gravel. Now, it does appear that in the past it was asphalt, so there is some old asphalt in some of that area now. It's not in any condition that would meet our current standards for a durable all-weather surface. So in the case of access and also parking, I've given you the code citations there. It does not appear that this application is meeting the code standard for a durable, dust-free, all-weather surface. So you will see some conditions coming up about that. And I think you'll hear from them as to their opinion on that. Let's also talk about the criteria of open storage of commodities and materials. I guess at this point, we're suggesting that you as the Planning Commission need to make a finding about whether this application meets the land use code without some form of fencing or other screening, building, to ensure that the storage is not considered as open. Or whether, the only other option is if you can't determine that it's not open storage, would be that you could require that the firewood be removed from the site and not stored on site. But staff's recommendation is that, as proposed, the firewood is an open storage of a commodity and material, and it needs to either be fenced so it could be determined to be not open storage, or not included in this application. Criteria for landscaping and buffering. So there's been some back and forth on this issue. I gave you the intent statement from the code there, section 5.05M, which is the intent of requiring landscape treatment for open space in commercial and industrial areas is to improve the appearance and layout of commercial developments in the community. These requirements apply to commercial developments of vacant lands as well as new development on land where existing structures were removed to provide commercial development. And then it does require under 5.05N3 that a minimum of 10% of the commercial area to be developed must be landscaped. A statement pertaining to percentages of lot coverage of building, parking areas, and landscape areas. They have shown landscaped areas on their site plan. It says landscaped areas. They are not proposing any new materials or vegetation from what I can tell from their submittal, but we'll also let them speak to that issue. So I guess with that, staff is recommending approval of the conditional use permit. We have a number of conditions there, and I'll go over them. That our standard condition that all requirements of utility providers, city departments, et cetera, be satisfied as outlined in city codes. I added specifically, all public improvements shall comply with the minimum requirements of the 2009 Cortez Construction Design Standards and Specifications. The next condition suggested is that the applicant meet all requirements of the Cortez Sanitation District regarding protection of the manholes and existing sewer line, being careful to coordinate with sanitation district if paving is required. Address be clearly marked for emergency response. Applicant comply with the submitted project narrative at all times. The application be revised to meet all requirements of the city engineer, and that's about drainage mostly, and also the surfacing requirements for access. The application shall be revised to meet all mitigations as suggested by the Parks and Recreation Department. The driveway entrance and employee parking area shall be surfaced in accordance with the Land Use Code 5.02J4 and 5.02F2, and that fencing or other screening material for the outdoor storage area shall be proposed. And I guess I missed going over the comments from agencies. I think the applicable ones are from the Cortez Sanitation District, which we discussed, the city engineer, who, as I said, speaks to drainage and surfacing to some degree. And then the city's Park and Recreation Director has some fairly detailed recommendations regarding buffering and landscaping of, and protective screening for the Carpenter Reserve Natural Area. He's also, some of his issues regarding water quality inflow will also be addressed by the city engineer's comments. I think that's it. Are there any questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
question for staff on condition number H. You say fencing or other screening measure for the outdoor storage shall be proposed. What exactly does that mean? Is it to be mandatory?
Yes. Well, I'm hoping that you guys will look at that condition, think through it, talk through it, determine whether it's appropriate or not, or if it needs to be amended to be more specific.
So that-
Absolutely. The intent there was, without some kind of fencing or screening measure, it appears that it's open storage on the property in violation of that provision of the code.
So that needs to be addressed.
Yes.
And if they built some sort of a building or a shed, they could store the wood in there then, and it wouldn't be considered? Oh. But how would that affect open storage, I guess, concept?
I think that if we had a new building proposed, it would be a revised site plan
Oh, okay.
and come back in front of you.
And you'd mentioned the outdoor theater of years ago had been there, and I would guess that maybe they weren't under some of the same conditions, because I can't imagine the whole thing was paved. I don't know, I don't have any
I think, as I said, there is some old pavement, at least at the entrance there. I do have photos of that, I believe, if you'd like to see it, but it's certainly not in any, it was probably put in 50 years
Right.
ago. So it's not in any condition that would meet current standards.
Right, I mean, most of the outdoor theaters I went to were gravel and dirt, and then when all the cars took off, they kind of caused a dust storm and,
The site plan proposes gravel for the parking and access drive, and I don't know if the intent was to take out what was there or,
okay. I was just curious, that's all. Anybody have any questions for Nancy anymore? Then I would invite the applicants to come up and make a presentation. Now, are we allowed to ask them questions through their presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
I would, you could choose, it's at the chair's discretion. You can interrupt them and ask questions at the time or hold your questions until the end of their presentation. But you certainly have the right to ask them questions.
Okay.
And as I mentioned, our process allows for, after the applicant speaks, the public has an opportunity to provide comment during the public comment portion of the hearing. Once that is concluded, then the applicant has the opportunity to come back up and make further comments or rebut comments that were made by the public. And then the staff has the same opportunity to come up and make final comments prior to you conducting your deliberation.
Okay, thank you. So applicant, go over there and just make sure the mic is turned.
Can you hear me? Oh, good.
Yes, thank you.
While they're doing that, I'll just introduce myself really quick, if that's okay. My name is Shelley DeConish. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Dufford Waldeck in Grand Junction, Colorado. I represent independent log company Anthony Moore and Mary Lancaster with respect to this conditional use permit application.
And what was the name again?
My name?
Yeah.
Shelley DeConish.
Jell?
Shelley, last name DeConish, D-A-C-K-O-N-I-S-H. That's my husband's name. I take no. I had a very simple maiden name, but
All right, thank you.
okay. Good evening. Thank you very much for taking the time and for your service to the community. It's a valuable role that you guys perform, and we very much appreciate you listening carefully and deliberating carefully on this what we think is a very worthy just really quick, we'd like to address, my clients would like to request recusal of Emily Waldron, given that she has spoken against this project in relatively strong terms in the past and has fairly recently, I think, posted on Facebook. I haven't seen that post, just heard about it. So the concern there is obviously that you may have prejudged the matter, and so that's the reason, the bias is the reason for their request. So I'll just let you respond to that, Patrick or Emily, before I go any further.
Yes, and the issue of recusal is dictated, the city doesn't have any specific rules or policies for the planning commission. We do have them for city council, and the city council rules essentially parrot the state statutes. Under Title 24, Article 18, there are two sets of rules. One are rules that are intended to be guidelines, but they're not mandatory. And then one set of rules are called rules of conduct that are mandatory. None of the rules, either the guidelines or the mandatory rules, address perceived biases, and I would point out that to my understanding, any bias that may have been communicated by Ms. Waldron was done relative to a prior application for rezoning, and has not been, she has not provided any input since she became a planning commission member or since this application was filed. There is a mandatory recusal section, and it says a member of the governing body of a local government. Of course, then the first question is a planning commission considered a governing body? I would propose that it is, that if the rule applies to city council, it applies to planning commission as well. But it says, who has a personal or private interest in a matter proposed or pending before the government body shall disclose such interests to the governing body and shall not vote thereon, and shall refrain from attempting to influence the decisions of the other members of the governing body in voting on the matter. And the key question is who has a personal or private interest. And the case law tends to deal with financial interests. And so an opinion about a previous application relative to the same property, certainly I don't believe rises to the level of a financial or business interest. And if she owned a house next door to the property, or a business, or maybe even had a competing log home manufacturing business, that would certainly be considered a personal or private interest. But I don't believe the mandatory requirement applies to this situation, and I think it's basically up to the individual commission member as to whether they believe that they can be unbiased in deciding on this particular application.
So if I'm hearing you right, any of the comments were made on the previous rezoning, is that right?
Correct.
I can make a statement now if that's the appropriate time.
Sure.
Yeah, last year, prior to joining the Planning Commission, prior to applying for a vacancy on the Planning Commission, I made comments as a private citizen and member of the public opposed to the rezoning. Those comments were based primarily on my experience on previous planning commissions and my experience with spot zoning, which was the discussion item on the table that night. After that meeting, I ended up joining the Planning Commission. I do not have property that borders the applicant's property. I am simply a citizen of Cortez. I'm volunteering my time here on the commission, and I assure you that I am evaluating this application for a conditional use permit, which is different than the previous one, within the bounds of the code and the materials provided to me. I will not be recusing myself.
So do you feel you can give an unbiased?
Absolutely.
Okay. Very good.
Thank you. We appreciate that. So we're ready to start the slideshow and go to the next slide. Thank you very much for running this slide. Just a little background on the applicant. They have 35 years of experience operating log home manufacturing, wildland fire suppression and mitigation, and a firewood processing business. Anthony Moore is a master log crafter, wildland firefighter, and firefighting task force leader. They have 54 contracts with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Forest Service Division for wildland firefighting. And from about June this year through the present, just so you're aware that they aren't always off in other areas of the country, they've been working wildland fire mitigation right here in Montezuma County. Next slide. This is just an aerial image of their existing facility in Alamosa, where they're doing the same uses that are proposed on this property, except that this has some buildings and some model homes and everything. But we just show that as an example of what the use looks like when it's in operation. The project has some benefits that we'd like you to keep in mind. Obviously, the firefighting and mitigation capabilities can enhance the safety of the community and surrounding areas. Having wildland firefighters so close is a nice benefit for the local community. The firewood that is the byproduct of this primary log home manufacturing use and wildland fire mitigation is kind of badly needed right now, especially in the indigenous community and those who are on fixed and or limited incomes who need firewood to heat their homes. And the log homes are attractive and cost-effective alternative, which is especially important in this day and age when acquiring a home or buying a home is becoming more and more challenging. So this provides another avenue for people to become homeowners. Next slide. And this is an example of a log home built by the applicant. Next one. Another image of a home. And the next one is the interior. So you can see these are very nice, nice home, nice product that they're producing. Next slide. Regarding the use of the site, one of the probably the nicest things about this proposed use is that when they're done using this property, assuming that you don't impose too many conditions and require a lot of changes to the site, it's going to be left the way it is. So for a future use to come in and make whatever use they want of it, that's a pretty unusual land use. Typically when there's a new land use, there's a building and concrete and fences and parking lots that go in, and it is what it is for the foreseeable future. So no permanent structures are proposed at present. And if they do come in later and want a building, they understand that they would have to come back and get approval for that. But for now, the only structures would be a pole barn, lean-to type structure that the wood miser and processor would be stored in. An open work area is crucial for the operation of log home assembly and wildland fire mitigation support, and also the firewood processing. All these are there's a lot of equipment that's large, and once you start fencing in and boxing in areas, the actual land use becomes impossible. So, and this will become more obvious as you see how the land use will operate in the next slides. So what happens is the logs are delivered to the site by tractor trailer and then unloaded for assembly. They're placed on pallets that are on the ground. The logs that they bring in are from beetle kill and other forest fire mitigation and forest stewardship programs. So they aren't loggers. They're wildland fire mitigators and firefighters, and the wood they bring in is a byproduct of that work. Next slide. This has also been described as a sawmill or a lumber mill. That's not what this use is at all. There's very little processing of the wood on site. The logs are used in substantially the same form as they're brought in. They remove some of the slab off the outside. They cut notches so that they fit together. So this isn't by any means a lumber mill. Next slide. These are just some images of the assembly process. So you can see it's just human beings with handheld tools and forklifts, just putting a home together. The homes are assembled on the site, and then they're disassembled and put on a truck and taken to the place where the home will be located and reassembled there. The firewood processing use has been described as an accessory use, but it really should be understood as part and parcel of this whole use. There's probably not a log home manufacturing use in the state, or possibly even in the country, that doesn't also process firewood, because it's too wasteful. You don't just throw away good wood. And the logs that come in have to be in a very good shape and they can explain more about this. I'm not as articulate as they are, but the logs have to meet certain qualifications before they can be notched and assembled into a home. And some of the logs won't meet those standards. So those logs will be cut into firewood. The slab byproduct is also sold for use off-site, including some ceremonial uses by indigenous tribes. Any sawdust from the firewood cutting will be blown into a trailer, and a covered trailer, an enclosed trailer, and taken off-site and used in landscape bedding or animal bedding. So we wanted to dispel some misconceptions about this application. Next slide. The applicant is not a logging company. The timber cutting activities, as I said, are just limited to forest fire fuel reduction, such as removal of beetle kill and other activities associated with their fire mitigation work. They don't go down and cut timber, so they aren't loggers. And the proposed use of the site is not a lumber mill, as we've already discussed. I can't tell if this was cleared up earlier. I don't think some of these other things were cleared up, and I thank you for that, Rachel. We appreciate that presentation at the beginning. That was very helpful. But this is one, it seems like from some of the comments of the Parks director that there's still some misunderstanding as to how the applicant proposes to access their site and how they've accessed it in the past. They have never used the Carpenter Trail driveway to access 1050 Lebanon. They've always used the access on Lebanon Road. In about April of last year, some folks saw some trucks and an excavator or a digger of some kind going from the Carpenter Trail Road to this property and reported that to the city. As it turned out, it was not the applicants at all. It was some folks who were doing work on the Carpenter Trail on behalf of the city. And they had used 1050 Lebanon Drive to load their equipment onto a trailer. So we just wanted to make sure that you understand that they have no intention of doing this and haven't done it in the past. And we would very much like to clear up that misperception. Next slide. No hazardous materials will be used or have been used on the site. Next slide. And I don't really need to go through this. That Rachel has already run through that. The citation history. They have not been cited, so we wanted to clarify that. And we'd also like to clarify that they did receive a grading permit from the city, but were told to stop work and didn't even finish the grading that they would have been allowed to do. So they really have tried to comply with all the requirements and keep their property neat and clean in response to each of the notices they received. Next slide. The staff report states that they sought a rezone, but what actually happened is they applied for a conditional use permit, and city staff steered them toward a rezone request for the reasons I think Nancy stated earlier. But it was never their intent to rezone this property. They don't particularly want it to be industrial either. And they feel that this is a good use, a good conditional use for this site. And we just wanted to clarify that they didn't feel they had a choice but to do that. They didn't retain me until after that hearing. So they didn't have the benefit of legal advice and just kind of did what they were told by the city staff. Next slide. With respect to the open storage question, it's very important that you guys consider this as a conditional use permit application for the use that's proposed. And that use, the open storage as it's been described, is integral to the use. The use can't be done in any other way. So it's not as if there's log home manufacturing and open storage going on. It's all integral. And given that the legal construction of the law is that the specific controls the general, and in this case, the log home manufacturing and the wildland fire mitigation are allowed uses with the conditional use permit. So we respectfully request that you consider this use in that context instead of thinking of log home manufacturing and open storage. It's all one thing, and one can't be there without the other. Log home manufacturing doesn't take place in any other manner than having open storage around it. Next slide. We're not sure about what is meant in the staff report by a 75-foot buffer. Obviously, they're not going to use the hillside. They're going to finish grading at a 2-to-1 slope over there, and they will be making use of some of that area. We just don't want to give the impression that they're proposing a 75-foot buffer there without digging into that a little more. And when I'm done speaking, they'll come up and talk a little bit more about their site plan, them being Anthony and Mary. As stated in our general project report, I'm not going to go through and read the whole general project report. It's quite long, and I know you guys have already read it. If you have any questions about it, we're happy to answer them. But I just wanted to reiterate a few of the things that are in there relating to the criteria, in particular buffering. There is really no buffer you could provide on the south side there, on the property line with the residential, because of the elevation change. The staff report says it's a 65-foot elevation change, but as measured by Anthony, it's really more like 110 feet. So that gives you some idea of just how high up those residences sit. So there really is no way to buffer it, and the elevation change itself creates quite a buffer there, and the vegetation on the slope. Next slide. One more misconception. The staff report refers to removal of non-useful wood to the landfill. The applicant just wants to clarify that none of the materials will end up in the landfill. They all get used as proposed in the application. Next slide. Some of the photos attached to the staff report are a little bit outdated, so we just wanted to provide some more current photos of the site as it appears now. And let's see, I have a different one. Can you go back one? Oh, okay. Well, that's different than what I have. But anyway, these are just photos of the site. Next slide. I can't quite tell. So this is the gravel area, taken from the gravel area by Lebanon Road. Next slide. This is taken from, that's the Carpenter Trail, the beginning of it right there. It's taken from up on the hill. Next slide. This is looking across, is this from Lebanon Road? Yes, okay. And next slide. And this is just a little bit higher view of the site. Next slide. And next slide. And this shows the gravel area, which will be in the area of where the parking will be for the people working on the site. Next slide. And you guys can come up and correct me if I'm missing anything on this, they know their site plan much more intimately than I do. The application tonight is for a conditional use permit with site plan approval. And the proposed uses are allowed, as Nancy said, with a conditional use permit per the land use code. And a conditional use permit does allow waiver or modification of the underlying zone standards where it makes sense for the proposed use. So the whole nature of a conditional use is it doesn't neatly fit in any zone district that the city has, or it doesn't neatly fit in this zone district. So you're allowed to review this and make conditions that make it compatible with the surroundings and protect the surrounding neighborhood. And that would include waiving some of the existing zoning bulk standards that don't make sense. Next slide. Some of the other applicable legal standards: due process, fair and impartial hearing. You've already been asked to disclose any ex parte contacts or any bias, and you've stated that none exist. Next slide. Equal protection of the laws requires governing bodies with land use authority to treat similarly situated property owners similarly. So shouldn't exact site improvements that aren't also imposed on surrounding landowners with similar uses. And if you'll notice, all the properties around the Carpenter Trail, none of them have any screening from the trail. They're all just open land uses, including one that has a sea of porta potties that are not in any way screened. There's a couple uses on the north side of the trail that are 24-hour uses. So these kinds of things really shouldn't be different for this land use unless there is a rational or reasonable basis for the different treatment. Next slide. And that are related to the development impacts, of course. In addition to those standards, obviously your decision has to be reasonable, related to legitimate government purposes, and not arbitrary or capricious. There has to be a nexus and proportionality for any of the conditions that you impose on their application. There has to be a link to the development impacts. And the next slide. The conditions can't be a pretext for other city goals. So one of the concerns that my client, that the applicant has, is that the city staff has indicated that they wanted this property, that the city wanted this property for some kind of an extension of the Carpenter Trail or some access to the Carpenter Trail. And that they were disappointed that they didn't get it or couldn't, and had asked them to maybe swap with another city-owned property that wasn't quite as suitable for this use. We just want to make sure that none of the conditions that are being imposed or any of the basis for your decision is related to that at all. Because in point of fact, they now own this property and they have a right to use it. If you're going to take their property, of course, you have to do that in a proper way through eminent domain and compensate them fairly, fair market value. So we just want to make sure that none of this is a pretext for trying to get that property for the city or for the neighbors to use. We also understand that prior to Independent Log Company buying this property, it was used as an access for the Carpenter Trail, and people may have gotten used to that. But that's the way it goes. It's privately owned property. They didn't really have a right to use it that way in the first place. So we don't want that to factor into your decision either. Next slide. Now we'd like to talk about some of the conditions. Generally speaking, the applicant is okay with some of the conditions, but there are a few that just don't make sense and won't work at all with this land use. One of them is the evergreen trees and the fencing that is requested by the Parks Department at the Carpenter Trail head there. First of all, there's no water to the site, so those trees are not going to survive. Second of all, there's no, all the other properties in the area don't have any buffering to the Carpenter Trail. So it doesn't really make sense for this land use to have to do that when others haven't. It's the same. Also, their property is only at the very entrance to the trail. Once you go through that notch in the trail, you can't even see this property anymore. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. The use of the Carpenter Trail isn't really impacted at all by what goes on this site. So they would request that no trees required to be planted or anything that's going to require watering. All the other properties have natural landscaping and, in their exterior spaces. With respect to fencing, next slide. This is a pretty popular through corridor for wildlife. They'd like to keep it that way, and fencing will just inhibit wildlife from coming through and won't really serve any useful purpose for the reasons I just stated. The site plan has a generous 30-foot open space buffer along that corner of the property where the Carpenter Trail is. And that's pretty valuable land there that they're agreeing to leave in its natural state and not use. So that's a considerable benefit to the community. Next slide. Regarding the surfacing improvements, they would request that the entrance be able to be left in the as the asphalt that is there now, and that the parking area be allowed to be gravel. There are several reasons for that. One is these are big tractor trailers that are coming and going, and that asphalt will, putting new asphalt there doesn't really work with this land use. It's also very expensive, and they believe it's unnecessary. The Carpenter Trail Road is basically dirt, so it's not like there's no precedent for not having these improvements at the driveway connection. Also, there's a lot of drainage that comes across this site, creating a lot more impermeable surface there. Will just inhibit that natural percolation through this site that is one of the best ways to manage stormwater runoff. So it doesn't make sense for that reason. Next slide. I think we've already talked about this to some extent with respect to the open storage question. Again, we don't think that's an accessory use. It's very, very integral to what the use actually is. But there's kind of a false equivalency between fencing and open storage. In every other land use jurisdiction I've dealt with, open storage isn't converted to anything else by the fact that there's a fence there. What open storage means is it's storage that's not in a building. So we would request that you disregard that false kind of equivalency and not require any fencing around the firewood. Also, they pick that up with front-end loaders. Fencing around it is going to make it very difficult for them to do that, and I'll let Anthony talk a little bit more about how that works. Let's see. Next slide. This is the same issue with respect to the staff report mentions that another option would be to require the firewood to be removed. It actually is going to be removed as soon as it's needed. So it isn't going to be stored there in any long-term way. Obviously, their goal is going to be to move it. They're not going to want to let it sit there. But there's nothing in the code in your land use code that requires, that states that firewood can't be openly stored on a piece of property. And most importantly, as we said, this is always a byproduct of log home manufacturing. It's part and parcel of that very land use. Next slide. So in sum, the applicant respectfully requests that the board recommend approval of the conditional use permit and of the site plan as proposed by the applicant, as set forth in the applicant's site plan and general project report, with the conditions set forth in the staff report, except for the fencing, screening, evergreen trees, paving, and the condition of no storage of firewood. Thank you. And you're welcome to ask me questions, but I'm just a lawyer. Your questions are probably going to be better directed to Anthony or Mary.
Does anyone have any questions for her?
Mr. Chairman, my question is, will there be any burning on site of wood or anything else?
No, I don't believe so. No.
What did you call it? Burying? Burning. Oh, burning. Oh, okay. Thank you.
Good evening. So
Names, please, for the record.
all right, thank you. Anthony Moore, Mary Lancaster.
Thank you.
So the word open storage has costed me 4 years. So I'd ask the council to really consider, when you bring a log in, that log's roughly 40 to 50 feet long. If you only need 30 feet of that out of that log, you take chainsaw and you cut that in and that in, and you get the prime piece that you're looking for, the butt and the top now becomes firewood. If you bring a log in and there's rules in the log homes as far as codes, if the log has spiral, if the log has rot, this stuff is done down at a yard, inspecting the log, examining it, and then you utilize the good piece out of there. I've done this for 30-some years, 35 years. I've never been to one log home manufacturing yard, that don't do firewood. You've got to do firewood. So even if you left the piece in an 8-foot piece and loaded on a trailer, it's part of that log. If you buck it up and split it up, it's still part of that original log. So if the open storage is not allowed, where do I store my log? The original log that come off the truck. So when I put it on the sawmill and I cut the slab off, that's a slab cut on the top and the bottom. How can that be stored? That would be open storage. It's all hand in hand. So if you didn't get rid of them pieces, it would build up over in a corner, and then you would have a fire hazard. So you've got to manufacture that, get rid of it, send it out the door. So, I bought that property, and I've really enjoyed the deer walking through that property. So when the staff originally confronted me of fencing, I was adamant that I didn't want to fence that. Because if you picture that back east part of that property, that's a long stretch. So when the deer come down out of the Carpenter Trail and they hit my 6-foot private fence, that's going to shove them right into the Carpenter Trail entry, right where everybody's pulling up to go walk on the trail. Now you got deer scattering left and right. And if they don't go that way, they go up on Broadway. Now you got deer out on the highway. So I adamantly said, that is, for that word, open space storage, we gain nothing by fencing that property. We are going to lose that corridor that them elk come out, or them deer come out every evening, and every night they go back through there. Everybody sees them, and I enjoy them. And I don't want to fence my property. I could very easily fence my property. For the 4 years that I have struggled with this, I could have already put a fence up. I could have just went and fenced it and been done a long time ago. It made no sense at all to fence that. To come in on the property and narrow down the fence, just, you have front end loaders. That fence is gonna be demolished in no time. The city staff and me discussed lean-tos. It's not gonna work. We've discussed buildings, building a building. You can't put firewood in a building. That's a huge fire hazard. If that firewood was to catch on fire, now you got a building to put out. So any type of method has already been exhausted for 4 years. And so in that aspect right there, I respectfully ask the council to really examine that, of what's common sense, and it all goes hand in hand. Every bit of that phase of that log home manufacturing goes hand in hand to the very end of getting rid of to bringing the logs in and putting them on the ground, to cutting the log and creating that slab, to getting rid of them end pieces and them top pieces and putting it into firewood and put this to bed. Because if I have to fence it, I'll fence it. But it ain't gonna be good for the wildlife. And I'd rather not fence it, but if it comes down to it, I'm gonna put a fence up. That's that. Any questions? And then I'll move on to the firefighting part of it.
I do have a question. So, I know that some of this firewood is meant to be, is it to be donated to those in need? Or are you selling it at a discount? What's going on?
The firewood is sold. You know, I'm a business, I'm in business. And so everything, every commodity, every part of the wood aspect is sold.
Okay, so, at the end of the year, do you have any firewood left over from the current year of log making? Or is it completely depleted and then the next year you start over again with a new bundle? Because I just wonder, like, how quickly are you selling this firewood?
Well, you know, so it's not, you know, I mean, we do multiple use of business, so, you know, that's what I was getting ready to go into, the firefighting part of it. And so it's not like we're over there, you know, every day gonna be doing this part of that business. And so we do wildland firefighting, so when we're off fighting fires, obviously, you know, there ain't much activity going on in that yard. And I've expressed this to staff before. It's like, you know, this is not a great big old business. This is a little family-owned business that we're not even gonna impact nobody. We've already improved the property. You know, when I bought the property, there was so much trash that it had accumulated on that property from being vacant, and there was homeless people living on the property. That caused them to be drawn to that area, and I've done nothing but improved it.
And I believe my question goes to, how quickly are we getting rid of this firewood? I believe that fencing is because due to the nature of firewood is not neatly stacked, it's like you said, it spares from the log. And so I wonder, how quickly can you get rid of this? Are you gonna donate the excess? How quickly? Because that's, I do believe one of the concerns is, one, fire, of course, and two, the way it looks on the property.
Okay, so good question, but, so if you look at the site plan, you take the firewood pile, and they're all separated. So if you go back, maybe Rachel could pull up my yard in Alamosa. This will give you a good idea, because that yard was already set up. And so I am a firefighter, so I've already put it in places that, you know, it's not all bundled together. So you have the firewood over here, you have the logs here, you have the houses here. But maybe she can get that first picture up of Alamosa yard.
Speaking of the Alamosa yard, what's the acreage on that one?
It was 10 acres, exact same size as this one.
Thanks, it's hard to tell in an area.
So you see that, it's a little bit longer strip. But that right there is 10 acres. But if they'd zoom in, I don't know if they have a way to zoom in on that back part back there, not up by the house, but, and then maybe they can move it a little bit. Yeah, there you go. Okay, let's really examine that. So you see how the logs are, you know, like stacked in different piles? Mm-hmm. That's per size, see, you know, so you're building different sizes of cabins, so some logs are like that, some are littler, medium. Then if you look right in there, that's that firewood processor and some firewood there on the ground. If they can possibly zoom in a little more. Right there in the middle. Huh?
And what's the accumulation of that one? Is that over 10 years, 5 years?
Oh, no. You know, everything's moved in and moved out. Moved in, moved out. The firewood is not, no, it is not, you're not storing it. It's just like the lawyer said, you're cutting it and moving it out, and you're cutting and moving it out.
And how quickly is that time frame on average?
Well, just, you know, you usually, like, say if it's in the spring, you know, you'd process some, and probably 30 days to 60 days, you'd start selling it midsummer, you know, when people start looking for firewood, especially the fall. Right now, if you had a pile of firewood over there, it'd be gone.
So you assume, let's use the Alamosa location, you would accumulate them throughout the summer. Of course, nobody needs firewood. And then once it comes towards fall, winter, you sell all your firewood.
Yep.
It's all gone.
Yep, it's all gone. Yep. Every bit of wood that we process over there will be gone by, you know, midwinter. And again, you know, you got to go back to the original log. You know, you've got a 40, 50-foot log, and if you're building a whole bunch of, you know, 40-foot cabins, you're not going to have very much waste. You know, does that make sense? You're only going to have a little bit of waste, so you're not going to have a lot of firewood to offer anyways, because most of that log went into a log house.
Thank you.
You say you have another section to go through?
Yep.
Okay.
So the fire.
I've got some questions, but I'll hold them till the end. I think.
Okay, well, if they pertain to wood stuff, let's go now because it's fresh on your mind.
Not necessarily. I think you answered most of the things that she had. I can't imagine the firewood when the winter comes, it's going to be there. It's going to get.
Oh, no, yeah, it's gone. You know, of course, you know, I mean, if anybody's ever burned firewood, so you start out in the spring and you're doing some fire mitigation projects. So you bring it down to a yard, you know, and you're sitting there, and I get every bit of the log cabin out of that it possibly can get out of it, and then you have that firewood. Well, then when you first start processing it, you know, it might have some moisture, so it's got to cure a little bit. But by midsummer, you know, firewood really starts picking up, and yeah, it's moved. It's not stored, you know. So again, that open storage, we're not even storing it. You know, it's a yard to process it or manufacture it and move it out. And the same with the logs. Again, you got to have a place to come in. You set the logs down. You work the logs. You put it into a cabin, and then you dismantle the cabin and move it off site and go put it into a house.
All right, thank you.
So the wildland firefighting, you know, 4 years ago, definitely this community didn't realize what an asset I am as a wildland firefighter. So in June, so I don't have a choice, you know, where I'm dispatched. You know, of course, that's dispatch. But I am first. This means number one on the list in Durango dispatch. So anytime Montezuma County or the surrounding area puts in an order for a need, I am the first one that will get that call, period. So in June, I got a call from dispatch. And when I first answer, I never know where I'm going. And I had just gotten back from California. And they said, yep, we need you to go to Dolores, Colorado. Boy, right here at home. So I've been serving the community. And I still got 2 more weeks to go. right here in Montezuma County, fighting all them fires that the lightning was, amazing lightning that was happening that everybody got to see. I was on it. So I asked the council to really consider what's really being proposed here. You know, this ain't about storing a bunch of junk equipment. This is wildland firefighting stuff and then equipment that is pertained to fire mitigation. Now, some of that stuff might look like it's sitting over there. Well, it's sitting over there because I don't have my application yet. I don't have my conditional use permit yet. Now, for me and Mary, this has been a very challenging task. But as I went along, I did decide I'm not selling the property. The property ain't for sale. Whether I get a conditional use or not, I'm not selling it. I'm going to put it into a trust. I'm going to keep it. I'm going to give it to my grandkids. That type of property took us 8 months to acquire it from the Allen's Theater. And my wife right here stayed with it. And she didn't quit. And I'm not quitting. And so I asked the council to consider all the things that me and Mary have been through in this. We've tried to be very patient through this process. It's been very challenging. I wish that word open storage wouldn't even been in there. But I thank you for your time, and we appreciate it.
I've got a couple questions.
Okay.
So when you build these log homes, then you disassemble them in sections and transport them?
Yeah.
To whoever.
It's like Lincoln logs, you know, you take them, you put them up and then you take it down just like Lincoln logs.
So is that considered manufactured housing then? So whoever's buying one of these has to have it, wherever they're putting it has to be zoned for manufactured housing? Would that?
No.
Okay.
No, because you're not building the whole thing, I guess. You know, it's not like you're putting all the windows and everything in it.
Okay.
None of that. No, you're not hauling it. You know, you use the manufacturing part of it would probably be, or not probably, be on the site as far as the, where the customer's house would be.
Okay.
This here is an offload yard that like the picture showed, all the logs are two-sided and then they're notched, that Scandinavian notch, and they're fit, and then you put them up, and then once they're up as a shell, they're not screwed together or nailed together, they're just loosely fit together.
And then, if I heard correctly, that the sawdust is blown into a trailer and shipped off somewhere. Do you have a market for that?
Yes. So again, we take nothing to the landfill. I've never took, nothing from my business to no landfill.
Okay.
It, over there in Alamosa is fast as we would, it would hit marketplace. I mean, we'd have too many people competing on it, wanting it, for bedding, for their animals. So, you can look, they took it down now, but you can zoom in on that Alamosa yard.
Fine, I was just wondering if there's already a pre-established market.
Oh, yeah, there is no problem getting rid of that.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have any questions?
What's the average cost that you sell one of the homes for?
It just depends on the size, like that one.
Right, like a 2,500 square
That
foot.
one that you seen that was up there is on the market right now for $475,000.
That's like what, a 5,000 square foot home? or
No, it's $2,380.
Okay, and that's, I know your representative mentioned that you would consider that to be providing affordable housing
Yeah,
for $450,000?
it's $475,000.
She said, are you considering that to be affordable housing?
Thank you.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Any other questions? All right.
I do. Where currently are the firefighting equipment stored right now?
A lot of it's out on fires, and what ain't is right there.
Okay. So you're still using this as a storing location for your firefighting equipment, correct?
Well, we use that yard, and then we use the yard across the street that's that we own also. And so to the west, across Lebanon, we own that other shop there that is a Quonset building.
And I do understand that you guys are not willing to fix that gravel into asphalt?
We're at. You're talking about the
Right,
approach?
The driveway, the
Oh,
parking area?
Okay, so yes, the thing of it is the equipment that we're running in and out of there, that gravel, type class 6 gravel will pack in just fine. And you're not tearing asphalt up like them heavy loads. Asphalt ain't gonna work like that. It's just gonna buckle and ripple and, and all that stuff. And so I have water trucks. All that the city staff should implement is that I don't create dust. I own my own tenders. I own all the stuff. So if it got dry enough, I'd run a tender water truck around there and spray my yard. But right now, what's on there is type 6, class 6 gravel. That packed in, that holds up. And the approach coming off of Lebanon already is adequate. I've looked at it. I'm a contractor. It wasn't put in 1950. It was put in, probably in the 90s. It's that right there is just fine. It ain't cracked up. Now later on, if needed, I can chip seal that part right there. But even that, eventually will probably have to be put class 6 gravel. I wished Dave Waters could have stayed here. He could have got up here and gave testimony on that. The loads coming in are 85,000 pounds.
One of my concern is the load getting onto Lebanon Road, destroying that road for those who are neighboring your location. Have you thought of any kind of resolution results to maybe not necessarily doing the whole driveway, but partial, so that you're not damaging the road?
It's already done. It's partially already done. If you go back to that slide and look at that slide, it's already asphalted.
Okay.
It runs down at least 30 feet right now of asphalt already.
Okay.
So from the Lebanon Road down 30 feet, it already has good asphalt on it. It doesn't have no cracks or anything. It's sound. It's good. Any engineer would go sign off on it tomorrow.
Just for fun, how much are you selling your cords?
Depends on where it goes, Around here locally, probably it'd be roughly 150 a cord.
And that's how much you would sell it for?
Yep.
So you deliver, is that what you're saying?
Then we have a delivery fee on top of that. How many cords you want?
Any questions?
So, hey, I'll sell my first 5 cords tonight before we get this settled.
I believe your lawyer, Shelby mentioned that these firewood cord were going towards indigenous individual. So
Yep,
why
so-
sell them at regular price when you could, because they're scrap, you could sell them at discounted price for these individuals?
Well, we do, so some of the tribe stuff, absolutely, in the past we have helped the tribe out a lot. And so, but that's another subject, here around Cortez and stuff, but I do take a lot of loads to the tribes, all to the chapter houses.
Anything else, anyone? All right, thank you. Then I guess at this time we would open for public comment, limited to 3 minutes. Make sure you state your name I don't want to know your address because Halloween is coming and I'm an ex-teacher, so I don't want to know where you live. But please state your name and they will start the timer for you.
My name is David Faulkner. I'm a natural resource biologist, retired. I can also state that I have also been timber management trained, worked about 4 years in that. I also trained in firefighting, served on several forest fires, including a couple of the big project fires. So I sympathize with all of you. I'm also resident of the area close to the Carpenter area, and I use that quite often. I just have a couple of questions that I want to mention in here. First of all, I look over listening to the presentation on here. It sounds like this company uses trucks extensively. They're in the forest picking up timber that has been damaged, which is great. But they have to load it on a truck, and then they take it to some place for it to cure and to be processed. And after this point, they have to pick it up again and truck it into an area where it's cut into the sizing for the log homes. And then, well, it may be at a different site, but then they assemble these, or loosely assemble these log homes so they can get the proper fit and make some additional saw adjustments. Then they load them on another truck, and then they take them to the final site where they are assembled and finished. And I hope I'm correct in the summation of that. That sounds like a lot of truck work. It sounds like a lot of time that those logs sit in one place for a while. And there's also the firewood that also has to be loaded onto a truck and hauled someplace. My question is, why isn't this all consolidated in one area? Why does it have to come into an area like this? Then I also have a question about the use of the word buffering. When I look at the buffering, I say, that's more than just growing a few trees. You've got a 100-foot view down onto this area. And also the eastern side of their site is also next to Carpenter. They only talk about the Carpenter access. That's only one side of their site. So my comment is, this is a great company. They're in the wrong place. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm taking notes on. We're killing trees, is that what you're saying?
My name is Charles Jeter, and I'm part of the Four Corners Rifle Pistol Club right up the road on Lebanon. And
Let me know.
just wanted to say that I want to answer I think that's a great question that he had about the trucks. And in my presentation, which is part of the public record, I actually go through the walkability of the community. What I wanted to talk about right now is the economic development side of it. I don't see a lot of that here. And Mike Levy last year, before I started doing some due diligence in Cora on Cortez, had asked me to come and talk to you about some of the things that I'm looking at with the way we can use a yardstick and measure impact of things so we can kind of gauge, environmental issues and economic issues and things. My passion, for example, is walkable communities, okay? So real quick, I'm gonna hit this economic development, then I'll go into my passion about the walkable communities because I've walked down to this man's business from up there at the U Cafe. I've done walks, I've done all these things, they're in the packet. I find that to be fantastic because the sidewalk goes all the way down to Lebanon. This is one of the only manufacturing places you're going to find that actually has the ability to take people who don't have cars off the reservation or veterans or whoever else who wants to get retrained as firefighters. They have to learn how to use heavy equipment. They have to build trust with Tony and Mary. So they use these multi-$1,000 pieces of equipment and don't wreck them. So those jobs have to start somewhere, and they start by being able to walk somewhere from affordable housing to your manufacturing location. And I don't think we're going to have another. I've looked through, and the first sheet you see on this is basically the Department of Local Affairs that talks about how many manufacturing jobs we've made from 2009 to 2021. Okay, well, that's 39. When I talked to Tony last year, I think it was 40 to 60 jobs is what he presented. That would double what we have in manufacturing growth in Montezuma County, let alone Cortez. Okay, this factor is missed. I think it should be more relevant for true economic development. That's in the appendix. Please keep that. That came out of my pocket. These things don't go cheap. But I want to flip it over real quick and say jobs come from net job creation comes from net new jobs. New businesses account nationwide for nearly all new net job creation, almost 20% of gross job creation. Companies less than 1 year old have created an average of 1.5 million jobs per year over the past 3 decades. This is a new business. This is Cortez. We need those jobs. These are walkable communities. People don't, one of the things that I think was excellent that he brought up was how many trucks you have coming in. Well, regardless, you're killing the amount of car traffic if you have a walkable community. That's one of the things I'm really passionate about. Okay, I'll let you go ahead and take a look at the rest of it. Just to answer your question, I did an article on the indigenous benefits and things like that. They're too modest. There were 20 different chapter houses chomping at the bit for delivery. This solves a double energy crisis. And I think they don't toot their own horn enough about how that impacts people. Just wanted to throw it out there. But I could answer many other questions if you want to take the time regarding the transportation, because I did do that article. So I'm standing by if you have any more questions about that.
Thank you.
Sure.
My name is Cliff Giffen. My wife Carol Taylor and I live at 913 Ridge Drive, Cortez, Colorado. Our residential lot shares a property line with the applicant. We've lived there since 1995. Carol and I are both opposed to the approval of the application for conditional use permit submitted by Independent Log Company. Some of the things I've heard tonight, one of the first things I heard is that the lot is vacant. It is not a vacant lot. It is being used as we speak. Many of the site plan, I downloaded the package from the city website, and many of the figures within the packet were illegible, so I was unable to adequately really review the entire package. In the package, Nancy's memo stated that that the independent log had been cited for code violations. If the applicant is currently in violation of the land use code, they should be required to bring their operation into compliance. The city should not be approving a conditional use permit to bring them into compliance. The term heavy commercial land uses was used many times in the package. There is no Cortez zoning called heavy commercial uses. Our residential lot is located directly along the line with this property. Our residential lot is not buffered from this operation in any way. Again, we've talked about this 75-foot buffer on the south side. That is not contained in the application. The photos that are in the application show that there's going to be a sawmill, a firewood processor, there's going to be trucks, there's going to be various equipment, chainsaws, and there is no limitation on when this equipment can be used. It can be used 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that's all I've got. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Andrew Collette. I work with the Colorado State Forest Service a lot, National Forest Foundation. And one thing I'm always talking with them about is needing more markets for all this dead wood we have in the wood, up in the mountains. They need places to go, and they're providing a market for that. They're giving somewhere, otherwise it falls on the ground up there and we just have a tinderbox. So for having a market, not to mention the jobs that this provides and the housing that it provides, it's taking it out of the woods and turning it into something usable other than just a tinderbox to burn the woods up. And another thing I wanted to kind of see about, maybe I misunderstood, but when that house that they mentioned about, when you asked about affordable housing, that house is on a lot. It's on a foundation. It has a well, it has septic. It's a set house ready to go. So I don't know what they sell them for exactly, you know, as a kit, but that's what that's on a lot with everything. So I just kind of wanted to clear that up. But thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Jim Swartz, and over the couple of years that I've known about these folks on this property, I've heard nothing but good about their business practices, about their wildland firefighting, but that's not the issue here tonight. The issue here tonight is whether this property is appropriate for that type of business. And I feel it is not. It does not meet the requirements of either the land use code section on conditional use permits, nor does it meet the comprehensive plan for the city of Cortez, both of which you are required to follow. You have copies of what I'm about to read with the appropriate reference numbers. Regarding the land use code, number one, the proposal is not compatible with adjacent existing uses, specifically the residential and open space uses. Regarding noise from multiple chainsaws and the mill, which, as we all know, sound rises up a slope. It doesn't stay dead there, it rises up. Regarding the comp plan, you have the section numbers in front of you. The city must utilize appropriate development to protect and enhance the quality of interface areas between residential neighborhoods and business areas. The city must enhance land use compatibility by requiring adequate buffers to separate incompatible uses and developing appropriate design standards to minimize potential impacts. The city must examine and develop review criteria to enhance the appearance and safety of the city's arterial roadways. And finally, the city must maintain land use policy so that businesses located adjacent to residential areas are compatible with the neighborhood in which they are located. And I tender to you that this property is not the right place for this business, no matter how good the people are who are doing it, no matter what advantages they may bring. This property is bounded on 1.5 sides by residential and by one side by a quiet, open space area. The fact that one side of it has industrial across the highway, that's where that should be, across the highway. So keep in mind the land use code and the comp plan when you make your decisions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Live in Montezuma County. My name's Bob Varkatos. Live in Mancos area.
I'm sorry, what was that name again?
Bob Varkatos.
Thank you.
I'm here to talk a little bit on these guys, Tony's behalf, and but first I want to answer one of her questions. Oh, can't see that far. Nina. As far as the firewood, I'm selling firewood out in Mancus. I can't even keep up. And by November, I'll be out and gone. So just to kind of clarify that a little bit more, give you a little bit more there. And I actually sell mine for $225 a cord, just so you know. So the $150, that's a discount. And I can't keep up. So just so you know. Other than that, you know, I was here last time talking for Tony and the family here. You've got a generational wealth sitting here. Maybe not money-wise, but look at the family behind them. Look at the people behind them. Look at the experience they bring to the fire mitigation, the firefighting, all of that thing. It's of generational wealth that this town needs, the county needs, surrounding counties need. You can't buy that, and y'all are just willing to throw it away over a parking lot that you would rather have instead of a man that's trying to make a living, do a business, bring taxes into the county, bring jobs into the county. And that's part of your guys' job, is the main job of a city council member right here on y'all's own website. You know, represent the community and make decisions that affect the city, financial stability, infrastructure improvements, economic development, to name, you know, just a few. I'm hoping, I'm praying that you guys are in the right position to make the decision to do the right thing. That's what I'm hoping. And I believe that of you in my heart, to do the right thing. Because all the rest of this stuff doesn't matter. It's the law. It's what you're required to do. And it's follow your own laws, which you're not following. So that's my opinion. Take it as you will, but God bless, and everybody have a good night. Hope you have a safe drive home.
Thank you. Oh, I'll do that later.
Good evening. My name is Gail Park, and I was here for the application for the zone change last year. This application, excuse me, is essentially the same as the zone change from last year, and all the objections from last year still apply to this. There are many objections, but I have only two that I'll read. Hours of operation. Logs come and logs go at night. This appears to be a 24-hour operation next to a residential area. Is this really what you want to happen in Cortez? And the really big thing is the fire hazard. Now, I know that we've been told that wood chips and sawdust will be put into trailers and trucked off, but getting rid of sawdust is a monumental problem. A couple years ago, the county had to close down Ironwood sawmill next to Dolores because
I'm sorry, excuse me a minute, I'll make sure you get your time. Stop the clock if you can, but if those in the audience would take their conversations out in the hallway, it would be less distracting for the commissioners, please. Thank you.
Well, I'm not sure where I was. A couple years ago, the county had to close down Ironwood Mill next to Dolores because of the ever-growing pile of sawdust. Getting rid of sawdust is a monumental problem, and I don't know what Independent Log plans to do with this, but they need to share that with Ironwood, because although the Ironwood Mill has been closed down, the fire hazard is still there. The mountain of sawdust is still there. This is a monumental problem. And we've heard that this will, Independent Log will provide lots of jobs. But Ironwood had to import workers and import trailer houses as a man camp because they were not able to get appropriate workers to work in their sawmill. So I'm not sure why Independent Log would be able to find the labor they need locally when Ironwood was not able to. And as for fire problems, perhaps you remember 3 or 4 years ago, I don't remember just when it was, there was a sawdust pile that spontaneously combusted. It was out, I think, close to Western Wallwood, but I'm not sure.
Thank you.
My name is Paul DeWitt. I live in the neighborhood above the applicant's property, where I can see and hear activities that occur there. So, good evening, Commission. I'm opposed to the approval of this application. As you are well aware, compatibility with surrounding uses is a requirement for approval of this permit. Industrial type activities are not compatible with residential zones, period. And isn't this in part a point of zoning to begin with? To my point, the application states, and I quote, "The proposed use is inherently compatible with all adjacent existing uses except for the residential neighborhood to the south." Many of the reasons that I was hearing today to why it's impractical or not realistic to comply with the land use code is a case in point to that incompatibility. Considering the application itself concedes this incompatibility with the residential neighborhood and the residents agree, and according to the map shown by the city planner earlier today, less than 50% of this property is even adjacent to other commercial properties, so over 50% is next to these incompatible uses. I respectfully request that the Commission recommend a denial of the request on the grounds that the requirements of compatibility of Land Use Code 6.10 F1 is not met. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Carol Taylor, and my husband Cliff Giffen just spoke, and we obviously are both against the application for the conditional use permit. And I just would like to add on top of that, that living above the logging company, that sound does carry up, no matter what the elevation is. We've heard it, I've heard it, as well as other noises and smoke when they first were trying to get rid of some of the the debris that was down there. But actually, what I'd like to do is bring attention to the city's Carpenter Natural Area. It is more than a Carpenter Trail. It is 180 acres with boundaries to ILC on the east and north side from the west entrance. Many ages use the main cement path from west and east entrances to walk, run, ride bikes, walk dogs, push strollers, and just to enjoy plants, flowers, views, and other parts of nature. There are many other dirt trails that pass around the lowlands and the highlands of Carpenter. There's also a large pond that has many migratory birds and other wetland life. Carpenter Natural Area has been documented with 150 species of plants, and you can see Al Schneider's information boxes at the entrances. Local birders have posted 150 species of birds on eBird, mostly migrating through. There are other unknown numbers of other species of mammals, reptiles, butterflies, and other insects. So my question, what happens to natural Carpenter's environment when water draining from ILC's work area drains into the creek and low wetlands? Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, my name is Rod Gray, and I have
I'm sorry,
worked-
could you repeat that?
My name is Rodney Gray.
Thank you.
I have worked around and with Independent Log Company for over 20 years, and you've seen by the pictures that they shown of Alamosa and other properties, they keep them quite neat and not to be a nuisance to the public as far as appearance. They do a very good job. As far as the sawmill, he's planning on a small wood miser sawmill, so to compare it with ironwood, there's no comparison. A wood miser sawmill, you can shovel the sawdust off each day and get rid of it. So that, the sawdust wouldn't be a problem. It's a simple, small, one-man operation on the sawmill. I own one, I do it myself. What Tony has proposed, I feel will bring enough good jobs and help the community in many various ways that I feel it should go through. And he does a good job of keeping things nice and tidy. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak for or against?
Good evening. Thank you for your service. My name is Graham Nielsen. My family started a business a few years ago in 1945 called Nielsen's Incorporated. One of the first jobs my dad did was to go clear the road of all the logs going up Taylor Mesa. You couldn't get on to Taylor Mesa until he went up there and cleared that. This used to be a community. We had Smokey Conley making log houses. We had Simmons making log houses. This was a community of logging. We had the plywood plant. I worked at the plywood plant right out of high school for a little while. It's gone. I think we need to get back to what helps this community, and having log products is something that has been a history with this community for 100 years, and I think it's time to go back to that. We approve a lot of different businesses here. Personally, I don't smoke pot. I don't understand why we have to have so many, but I think something like this is far more important to the community than another pot shop. So I think we need to consider this in that light, that this is something positive for the community. And I'm not bad-mouthing the dispensaries, I'm not. I'd like to address the sawdust issue that the nice lady brought up. The sawdust that comes off of this process is a fine sawdust that can be used for bedding for animals. It can be used in gardens. The stuff that's up at Ironwood is large chips, pieces of logs. It's not even comparable to what this stuff is. This stuff, the small amount that can be made is blown into a trailer, and it's immediately delivered to customers that are in demand for it, for their animals or for their gardens or for whatever. So I would like to look at this in a logical way. That property has been a logging operation, I believe, since 1971. They're not doing anything really new with it. What they're doing is they're going to start log house manufacturing there, but it's still dealing with wood products that property has been doing way before Carpenter was there. So I believe there's some grandfathering, as I understand it, involved in this. And as far as Tony, you can't get to the position he's with the Department of Fire Safety without a lot of education and a lot of attention to detail. And that describes Tony to a T. He will take care of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I am Medea Leonard, and I live on Ridge Drive, just above where the company is. I have no problem with the company as is, but like so many of my other neighbors, I feel like it's in the wrong place. If this permit is allowed, my question is, how is it going to be monitored? And who's going to monitor it to make sure that they stay in compliance? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak for or against? Do we need the applicant to come up and do any clarification? You want to come back up and speak? Yes. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you again, Shelley DeConish, Dufford Waldeck, for the applicant. Just wanted to address a few things that were said. Wanted to clarify that our general project report says that the land use is inherently compatible with all the uses except the residential. The key word there is inherently. It's not inherently compatible with residential, but it is compatible because there's no noise detected at the property line. He has tested that. There are no lights shining in the windows. It's not a lit up use. There's a natural elevation buffer of 110 feet. So those homes up there look out across the property, not directly at it. In other words, it's not an eye level operation. So noise, light, those things are compatible. As for the Carpenter Trail area, a couple things were mentioned that we wanted to address. One, you cannot see the property at all from the pond. There's no evidence that this use will have any negative impact at all on wildlife in the whole 180 acre, I believe, trail area. And especially if there's no fence, it will simply migrate through the property the way it always has. For the truck traffic, keep in mind that they build from between 1 to 3 homes a year. So it's not like these logs are coming and going daily, weekly, or even monthly. So it's, some of the comments made it sound like it was going to be a constant stream of truck traffic. That's not the case. The drainage comment, the drainage goes the other way. So the whole Carpenter Trail area drains toward the property. The property doesn't drain toward the pond on Carpenter Trail. The hours will be limited from 7 to 7. Sorry, we didn't mention that earlier, but it is in our one of the supplements to our general project report, except in emergencies. When they get dispatched to a fire, then they would come in and move the equipment out when needed. Someone mentioned that it's the same application as before. It's actually not, of course. An industrial rezone would actually open up this property to all kinds of industrial uses, many of which would be more intense than this one. So we just wanted to make sure you understand it really isn't the same application, and the outcome of the request wouldn't be the same. And then someone asked how compliance with the approval would be monitored. It would be monitored in the same way that all land uses are monitored, through code enforcement. So if someone observes a problem, they would report it and it would be investigated and checked. Also, they have to comply with all laws and ordinances, including noise ordinances and things like that. So those things can all be paid attention to in an ongoing manner. Also, I think Tony and Mary would like to talk about the buffers and make some clarifications on those.
I actually have a quick question for you. Can you say who performed the noise study? Was it an engineering company? There's no information.
It's in the general project report, but I think, did you do it, Tom?
Yep.
Tony?
So it wasn't done by a certified engineer that specifies in that?
No, but they're welcome too. They'll be the same noise levels.
Okay, thank you.
Is that all for me? Thank you.
They're gonna get the map and bring it up in front where we can clarify something. Take it right up there if they want. So what we're proposing, I don't know where Nancy was, maybe didn't see on the site plan, but the 30 foot to the north is what we're proposing to be a natural area. We didn't propose nothing to the east, and we're not proposing nothing to the south. We need all that land right there already. I feel that we're being very generous by proposing 30 feet already. That pulled everything off of the Carpenter Trail Road. But again, as far as the parks and recs, that would not be adequate to even try to put trees in there. When that floods, water's just gonna wipe them little 4-foot trees out. And there ain't no water anyways to water them. So respectfully, the council will do away with that. What else was there? There was something.
Can I actually ask you a question in relation to water? So am I understanding your site plan correctly that you are planning to have berms on that eastern perimeter to prevent stormwater from moving onto your location from Carpenter?
Well, the water comes down Carpenter, it goes right into the road. It doesn't come on my elevation is higher
Okay, so
than
there's
the bottom of Carpenter or at the entrance of Carpenter Trail and that road is a lower elevation. That's where the water comes out. That's a city problem. That's not my problem.
So you're saying that you're confident that the existing topography would prevent any stormwater from moving onto your location?
The property, as you run, farther south, the property gains elevation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but what I'm saying is you have described, and the topography and knowing the area, that the drainage, the movement of water is from east to west primarily.
Correct.
And so what I'm wondering is on the eastern side of your location, because I see detailed drawings of a swale on your engineering drawings, but I can't find where that would be on your property. So I'm
It
not
would be
concerned
the
with.
northeastern portion.
Okay, and that would be to prevent stormwater from coming onto your property.
Well, it's just to keep it in that channel, and so that channel, that buffer right there, that 30 feet that I'm pulling back, that will help also the city road, because them are the two lowest points, so that's a natural drainage area.
Okay.
Yeah, that elevation is like what you'd refer to as a little canal. And then the farther south that you'd go on my property, the elevation rises, so that's the most logical place the water's gonna drain, correct?
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions for the applicant? Any questions for city staff?
I have 2 questions for city staff.
Claire?
I'm a bit confused because the site plan dated August 1st, 2024 does show and I'm reading it off of it, 30-foot wide buffer along this side, which is the eastern side of the property, to provide separation of land use types. No equipment, storage, or materials will be placed inside this buffer. So that you did propose a buffer on the eastern side, 30 feet, okay? And then the commissioner's correct. Your plans also show a drainage swale along the eastern and northern property boundaries to direct the to keep the drainage from going on to Carpenter, directed back towards Lebanon.
I know what she's talking about, so that site plan shows that corner, and that's a 50 by 50 corner right there in the parking. And that's, but the buffer does not run to the east, all the way along the east.
So Nancy, are you just saying that the buffer is just space to provide distance between, yeah, that's what it says here. Separation.
Well, we need to be clear. This is dated August 1st. This is the updated one. And if this is approved, this is one referenced in the plan that you would be held.
What? I think we need clarification on the semantics of, it just says no equipment stored in that area.
Well, no, on page 3, it very clearly identifies the entire eastern perimeter as a 30-foot wide
Yeah,
buffer.
right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just says, no equipment storage or materials will be placed inside that 30-foot wide. But there's no berm.
Well, that's on page 2, where they also say that there's a drainage swale on the northeastern side.
Who's Cap? Oh.
Well, you're not showing any proposed uses over there. No, I mean, I guess you submitted that. If this gets, are you now proposing a change to what you submitted?
Mr. Chair, I would recommend that anybody that speaks from the audience go up to the microphone so it becomes part of the record.
Yeah.
Can they revise their site plan in between? I guess they could. Yeah, I guess if you want to submit a revised plan, we don't know what'll happen here tonight, but
It will go on to city council regardless of what planning commission decides tonight. So whether it's a recommendation for approval or denial, city council will hear the application, and if they want to submit amended documentation, they certainly are able to do that and would have to explain it to the city council.
So city council doesn't have to review the same application materials that we've reviewed?
Well, generally, they review the same application, but if, based on the recommendations from Planning Commission, they have the ability to make modifications to their application.
Yeah, I would remind commissioners, all we do is make a recommendation to council, and they're the final decision makers.
But there is an alternative to continue this to a date certain, if we need more
That's
information.
one option the Planning Commission has.
So it won't go before the city council if we ask for a continued
Yeah, it
review
can't
to
go
date
before
certain?
council and
Okay, so that is an option. It's not just yes or no.
I did have a couple of questions for staff whenever that moment is correct. Is that now, or are we waiting?
No, you can go ahead, because I'm,
Okay. So I was wondering, and I didn't see in skimming quickly if we define storage at all within the code, whether it be open or just any kind of storage, if there's any definition to that.
I'll have to look on storage. I know we don't define open storage.
Okay. And then my only other question was if there were examples in Cortez right now where we have that residential 1 zoning abutting industrial zoning, and I'm too far away from the map to be able to answer that question myself.
this is only commercial zoning, not industrial.
Well, no, but, oh, sorry. No, the reason I'm asking that is because, not industrial, I guess,
Commercial?
yeah, sorry, where you have the commercial abutting the residential. And then, and are any of those operating under a conditional use permit?
I don't know.
Okay, just looking for precedent here.
I mean, I'm sure there's, well, I won't say that.
I'd
I
do
don't
some
know.
research.
We're looking up definition of storage.
Yep.
Well, while they're looking, I'll remind the Planning Commission that, as stated in your staff report, there are 6 criteria that you need to review this application for a conditional use. And you should limit your decision-making to compliance with the 6 criteria. So whether it's a recommendation for approval or denial, you want to reference the criteria. And obviously, because it's a conditional use, you can impose conditions that would achieve compliance with those 6 criteria, and that's what the staff has recommended, but you're not bound by the staff's recommendations. But I would recommend you reference those 6 criteria in your discussion.
Are you sure there's only 6?
Yeah, there's 6 in the code, and they're listed in the staff report on page 3. 3 and 4.
And I can clarify, we do not define storage.
Say it, oh, yeah, okay. Yeah. Oh, okay. So Nancy, there was no definition of open?
No definition of open. No definition of open, no definition of storage currently exists in the code.
Correct.
Do we have any more questions?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Mary Lancaster. So I just want it noted, but we want to amend the site plan and we want to take out that 75-foot buffer and those wording that says that. We want to amend the site plan. It should not, we don't want that in there. So the 75-foot buffer and the wording that says 30-foot wide buffer, that needs to be amended and taken out, please. Only on the east side.
That's only 30 foot, right?
Yeah.
It's marked as 75 and it's textually labeled as 30.
So we want the 75 we want the 75 amended and we would like the 30-foot also taken out, and then the site plan will be fine.
Where do you see 75? No, that's from there to there.
No, this 75 is from this corner to this corner.
Yeah.
And then
but
this
the
is pointing,
buffer is only
this is the
30 foot
30
wide.
buffer, yeah.
It's Well, Patrick, we might need a little guidance here, I guess. So do they have to submit a new site plan to council then?
Yeah, they're asking you to vote on the site plan as verbally amended. And this is not uncommon, you know, if, it's not uncommon for applicants to say, well, we'll agree to build a building or build a fence or whatever, and the planning commission can make a recommendation that approval of the site plan as amended by the addition or the subtraction of certain aspects of it. So, yeah, if whatever the motion is, certainly if it's to approve it, it should include as amended by the applicant's statement on the record.
Should that statement have come at the beginning of their presentation? Prior to the public comment?
It's frequently occurs where, based on the conversation, the evidence and testimony that is received from the public or the staff, they will make changes on the fly, and you know, they certainly to the extent they want to preserve those changes going forward and have the city council review them, then I would suggest they would be wise to amend their actual written application to include whatever changes they are suggesting that you consider tonight.
Does anybody else have any questions for staff or?
I apologize. So we're amending to remove the 75 and the 30, but what are we changing to? No buffers? 30-foot buffer along the north side. Okay.
And currently that is not on your plan, right? I'm looking at page 3 and I don't see.
Yeah, it's up there.
Oh, okay, okay.
Sorry, we didn't have you go to the podium. Yeah, he's not here, that works. Any other questions before we close the public hearing and we have discussion? All right, we'll close the public hearing and we'll have our discussion and deliberation. Did you want to take a 5-minute break? Yes, please. We'll take a 5-minute recess at 9:10. We'll be back at 9:15. Call this meeting back to order. Patrick, we may have some more questions for you, but go ahead.
For the city attorney, legal question concerning section 5.07J. Is it my understanding that staff recommended in their motion, number H, that fencing or some other solution needs to be provided or accounted for? Is that what the code is saying, that that's mandatory, that there needs to be a solution to?
So what that code section, it's actually in two parts, because it has an exception for accessory uses in an industrial or PUD zone, which is not applicable here. So the code essentially says no open storage of materials or commodities shall be permitted, period, in the commercial zone district. Now, so it raises a couple questions. One is the firewood considered a material or a commodity? And I think the applicants maybe have made some arguments that would indicate that it might not be a material or a commodity. The other issue is, what does open storage, and is there some condition that Planning Commission would like to propose other than the status quo, which is, I believe, what they're proposing, that the firewood be allowed to be placed on the property temporarily without any screening or fencing or other cover to remove it from the definition of open storage. And obviously open storage is not defined in the code, so it's going to have to be what Planning Commission reasonably determines would be applicable to this application. And so, I think you need to decide, number one, is firewood a material or a commodity in light of the evidence and testimony you received? And number two, to prevent it from being open storage, is there something that you want to make as a condition? Staff has recommended fencing. If you chose to accept that, then you would be accepting the fact that fencing removes the firewood from the classification of open storage. You could determine that it's not open storage at all without any cover because of the way it's produced or the length of time it's left on the property and that sort of thing. So it really requires some interpretation of the code, and unfortunately the code that we are working with right now is subject to more than one interpretation.
We're going to fix that in the new code, right?
Yes, we are.
Well, yeah, the wording on H, it called for outdoor storage, but then over here it's called open storage. And I was getting confused. What's the difference? But any more further discussion and things?
I don't have a question. I just would like to say that my interpretation is that open storage has been a moving target even the last time this came before us. And from my understanding from the applicants, the turnover time for this wood and these logs is not long enough to be considered storage.
I think I would concur with that.
I think it's also important to note that the arguments or the information presented tonight really clearly does identify your product, the firewood especially, as a commodity, the definition of commodity being a raw material or primary agricultural product that can be bought and sold. So I think that that does place the material in that open storage requirement within the code that we're working with right now. And I think that the question before us as commissioners is what we would want to see to make that not be open storage.
I disagree. I don't think can be deemed a commodity. I think it's a byproduct. And yes, they're making money, but it's to get rid of it, essentially. And so that's not the main function of this company. And so I wouldn't go so far as to call it a commodity, more of a byproduct and part of the circular process that they described.
Well, I think the entire enterprise is selling a commodity, an agricultural product of lumber being sold either as log homes or firewood.
Agree, but it doesn't rise to the level of storage, in my opinion.
And I think that's really like the rub with the whole discussion, right? Is that we have a code that doesn't define a word that I'm sure has come up in applications other than this. And I think that's like the really hard part when we're talking about this application, because that's the only part that is in question as far as like, does it comply with the code?
And I guess when you talk about storage, it's like, how long constitutes storage?
Which is why I hoped we had a definition.
Yeah, and we don't. So it's, I see it coming and going.
Could it be that we suggest the firewood be removed almost the same time and almost as quickly as the shreds of
Sawdust.
Sawdust, thank you.
Well, then we got to define quickly.
Well, I think like,
or reasonable amount of time.
yeah, I think kind of what that would be instead of the condition of approval recommended by staff, it would, I think, be changing that condition of approval to, instead of requiring open storage, requiring a time limit on how long that material is there, so that it would not be considered storage. It would be considered, like a temporary use of the property. And perhaps that's a better way to approach our lack of definition of storage than trying to define it as a planning commission.
So it would almost be better to leave that H condition off totally.
I think so, I think that we
change
do
the
need
wording.
to address the fact that it is a commodity that will be on location for a period of time, and that can be considered storage depending on your definition, of which we don't have one to refer to. I think a better condition of approval would be something discussing the amount of time that the material is stored on the location, instead of trying to define what open storage is or is not.
If it is a commodity to be sold, would you guys be up for considering it, since it is?
Are we able to continue to ask them questions?
Yeah, at the chair's discretion, you can certainly ask the applicant to go back up and respond to questions, but I would, again, have them speak into the microphone.
So yeah, I'll go back up there and I kind of envision this firewood as coming and going. It's like the one guy said, he'll have it there for a while and he's gonna be out.
Yeah, I understand that, but could it be that we not sell it and consider it then not commodity, and be able to donate this to those who are actually in need, as it is not the primary item that is being used, correct? This is just spares. So then, if you're not selling it, it would not be considered commodity.
Except if you want to charge a price, you could write it off your taxes as a donation. So it's to be a commodity.
And also, you're still selling the main product. And I think that the storage is not unique to the firewood, it's unique to everything.
I think we ought to let city council hash this out. But did you have a question for them?
I guess I was just wondering, would that ever come across as a,
Well, I would like to kind of explain the process a little better as far as, the processing of the wood. There is sometimes a curing part, that the wood would have to dry. So yes, us applicants are definitely asking for long-term storage. But, when you cut a log that might have some moisture, you're looking at minimum 3 months before it would dry. So, we'd have to have a 6-month window of storage. But, just like you said, you're cutting it and moving it, and cutting it and moving it, and cutting it and moving it. So the actual piece that's there, it's not even staying there very long. So it doesn't even really pertain to this open storage because you're moving it in and moving it out, moving it in, moving it out. And so again, what gets so monotonous about this is, well, what about the slabs? Why ain't we focusing on the slabs? Mm-hmm. Why ain't we focusing on the logs? What about the log home in the yard? What if it sits there longer than 6 months? Open storage, it's out there that, and so again, your main part of this whole picture is the log home, the log home. Yeah. Well, what if that log home sits there longer, and all that? Why ain't it open storage? And then again, they showed you them pictures of them slabs. That's part of the process. That's married to that log at one time, and then we've sawed it off, put it in a bundle, and set it over there. So why ain't that being honed in on? So again, then you have the top of the log and you have the bottom of the log. Now you just turn that into firewood. It's all the same. It's all the same piece of log.
that's a great question. So those slabs and the log, how long does it stay on the property?
Well, it takes, about 3 months to do the notching just on one cabin. And so, there was some stuff that came up earlier about trucking. It's very minimum trucking. You bring some logs in there and then it takes 3 months to make one cabin. So if we weren't doing no fires at all, we would be doing 1 to 3 cabins a year. That is so small time, it ain't even funny.
Okay, thank you. So if we don't,
I'm sorry. One thing that I just needed to bring to your attention, and although me and Tony are we do donate a lot of our time and a lot of things, you can't ask us to donate our product. That's a taking. And the other thing is, years ago, they made a land use code. And in that land use code, they already did all the work for us. And they said, this is a log home manufacturing yard. This is where it can go. This is a dump. This is a car wash. And each of those things has components. You can't give a conditional use on a dump and then tell them they can't bring in trash. It is a log home manufacturing. That's what we're asking for. It's all one and the same. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So.
Well, yeah, so
How would you reword that if you don't take it out totally?
without addressing the code discussing open storage not being compatible, how do you make a motion for approval?
So my point is it's not storage at all because everything is being used and everything's part of a process. Storage to me, because I throw things away all the time, I don't store anything, is stuff you set aside that you're not going to use. And you don't know what you're going to do with it, and you don't know the time. We can't back ourselves into a corner with a time frame or a size of a fence. They're using every single piece of this. Maybe not as fast as we'd like them to, but it's not our job to set parameters that tightly. We have to be more business-friendly than that.
Because of our lack of definition, I would say we just do away with H.
One way I would suggest perhaps, and I think somebody else had already mentioned it, is if you're looking for a way to approve it without the open storage limitation, you could say that the Planning Commission has determined that the firewood is a byproduct of the log home manufacturing and is not considered a material or commodity. Therefore, section 5.07J does not apply.
Could you read that section one more time?
Yeah, it says no open storage of materials or commodities shall be permitted except as an accessory use to a main use located in a building in a industrial or PUD district. So if you determine that it's neither a material or a commodity, and again, I don't believe byproduct is a term that appears in the code, but it would seem that that might be one way to define it, which I believe is what the applicants are suggesting, that it's a byproduct of the log home manufacturing. It's not a separate material or commodity. And by...
It's not the main business is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I'd buy that. Now, the wording of it is a little more challenging, but I would also like to discuss F, where it meets all mitigations suggested by Parks and Rec. I don't buy that because of the trees and all the other stuff that he was wanting to put in there.
I agree, Mr. Chairman. I don't
Yeah.
think that the requirement of trees is required by the code.
Yeah, just sticking with the code, not what the Parks and Director wanted. I'd almost take that F totally out.
And I think also looking at condition of approval E, I want to highlight, and I do think that the way the condition is written addresses this, but the applicant in their presentation stated a 2-to-1 slope, and the city engineer really strongly advises a 3-to-1, and I think the code might say 3-to-1, but that's definitely like very standard grading, a 3-to-1 slope, and so that's a condition of approval that I think is important to make sure stays on whatever eventual motion is made.
And the city engineer would be the one to
He highlights
make
that.
sure that's goes. Yeah, okay.
So I think when we look at the proposed motion given to us by staff in their report, and definitely correct me if I'm wrong, I think that we can agree on conditions A, B, C, and D,
And E.
and E, and that the ones that we are uncertain of are the final 3.
Agree.
Surfaced in accordance.
So
I could go along with the F and the H. The entrance employee parking is to be served in accordance.
I'm not in total agreement with G just because of snow melt and all that stuff can affect asphalt. And he did say that there's about 30 feet already there that's in good condition and the gravel is sufficient and when you're gonna have snow melt and runoff.
Yeah, I feel the hard packed gravel in the areas was fine. So I'm like you, we probably don't even need G. Because it's already taken care of at the entrance.
yeah, and I guess that's our determination to make if we feel like what was presented satisfies the code requirement.
So if I can summarize what she said, is to go ahead and have a motion approving it with conditions A, B, C, D, and E. Is that what you were saying?
I was more saying that those conditions didn't require any further discussion from us, that we had narrowed down the areas of concern to those final 3 conditions. I wasn't at the point of recommending or making a motion yet. I was just trying to focus our discussion a little bit.
But I agree with what you said, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah,
I would be amenable to that.
I'm fine with leaving off F, G, and H, which is where our discussion has sort of been, except the Parks and Rec, you didn't.
Yeah, I guess my hesitation, especially considering that this is a quasi-judicial matter, is that I don't see any references in Parks and Rec's requested mitigation to where that would be found in the code. And so it feels like a big ask without much information backing it up. And maybe I missed something in the packet and staff can speak to that, but the information that I was given didn't seem to reference kind of the meat of their request.
It was more like a want rather than a requirement.
Rather than a compliance requirement.
Yeah, okay. That's kind of the way I was reading it.
Okay, 1 second.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I think it was just you and I that were on here the last time this came up.
I was in the hospital.
Oh, okay. Well, that reads verbatim as to what was in the packet the last time we reviewed the zoning request, and so I think it applies.
Perhaps it wasn't reviewed.
here. Right.
So it's like a copy and a paste is what you're telling me.
When I was looking, so could you clarify the question, what was whether or not the Parks and Rec directors meet the code?
Well, yeah, you know, like the engineering, the city engineer references, you know, kind of like some CDOT standards. They reference some sections of the code. And I didn't see any references to standards or code or anything in the 4 requested mitigation items from the Parks and Rec.
It was more like opinions.
And so I'm thinking, you know, like, do we not need to have a foundation to request those as a condition of approval?
Well, he did not reference the code, you're correct. Although his request on the 4-foot tall evergreen trees does match the landscape standards. So if you're proposing trees, 4 foot is the minimum for evergreen trees for buffering. The 15-foot on center is not in the code. But I would say all of his 4 points, he's simply addressing the conditional use permit criteria of adequate buffering. So whether or not, remember, you need to make the finding, finding number 2, criteria number 2, the proposed conditional use has incorporated design features sufficient to protect adjacent uses, including but not limited to, and it'll go through the list, service area, pedestrian, buffering is on that list. So I think that all of his requests were about buffering the natural area. It got worse because remember, he was reviewing with a 30-foot buffer and they've just pulled that from you. So at this point now, I believe they're proposing to store equipment up to the edge of that property line facing Carpenter Preserve.
Okay, thanks, that's the info I was looking.
So in your findings, think hard. I mean, when we wrote the findings saying there was an adequate buffer, it was based on a 30-foot buffer. Now that's gone.
Right, and that was a 30-foot non-vegetated buffer, correct? It was just 30 feet? Correct. Okay, yeah.
It did include, it includes a drainage swale.
Right, right.
Yeah.
But no vegetation was proposed by the applicant.
You need to go to the podium so we can get it on record. Well, so what you're kind of saying is.
So the confusion to me is Nancy just said, she said, where the buffer was, where the Carpenter Trail is. So the only buffer that we agreed to was where the access road is. So are we all on the same page on that? That's all I'm concerned about.
Yes, I was stating that the buffer that you had previously proposed adjacent to Carpenter Preserve on the east property line, you have now said you're not going to do that. And I'm understanding then that you would be storing equipment and vehicles right up to that property line with no buffer proposed.
Correct.
Correct.
On the mountainside, where the ridge.
East side, on the east side.
On the east side.
Which is what you informed us you wanted to amend that was incorrect.
That's east.
The mountainside is the south side.
Right.
Yeah, mountainside, south side.
Yeah, so there won't be a buffer there, and
This is the east side we're talking about.
Correct, okay.
And I'll say you did not propose a buffer on the mountainside, on the south side. You also didn't propose any uses to be there. So I'm not sure withdrawing that, what that means. You'd have to, are you saying you're now gonna put things on the mountainside? You need to be clear, because we would enforce this site plan, and it does not show anything other than the parking area along that side, and perhaps a future building envelope.
Yeah. Shelley's coming up here. So what I said earlier was what I wanted to amend, and yeah. Yeah. So it's where the ridge is. There's a ridge up there. So the other thing is, I guess my concern is because I have been watching a lot of the meetings lately, and there's a huge water problem in Cortez right now, and the water has been, you've had really furious people in here. So I feel like, and also too, they've been giving grant money for hardscaping. So I feel like to ask us to plant trees when we don't have water, who is going to water those trees? I feel like that's a reach. I feel like that's going against everything that you guys are trying to do. You're trying to encourage people to hardscape.
Were you proposing to hardscape and I missed it in your application?
No, I'm proposing that we shouldn't have to plant trees that need water.
Yeah, I don't
So
think.
the alternative would be hardscaping, and so
The alternative is the natural barrier, the natural growth that the gym got to use in theirs. They just got to use that in theirs, and you guys approved it. I'm talking about just leaving that natural. It's actually really good, really good.
Yeah, I don't think we're talking about trees anymore. On the north side? You still wanted trees there? I don't think they'll survive. Right here? He wanted trees on the north,
north and east.
4-foot tall evergreens.
Well, and I think, Nancy, when you were answering my question a few minutes ago, I didn't write it down, but it was if landscaping is proposed, I think, then the default is trees that are 4 feet high. And I think what the applicant just said is that no landscaping is proposed. So does that close that loop and allow us to then
Yeah,
remove that
landscaping
condition?
does not need to be trees, it could be grasses.
So.
Actually, it could be non-organic. It could be big boulders or gravel.
So
That's
her-
landscaping, yeah, the code doesn't
Right, but-
require organic, living landscaping.
So her question, I believe, is can we leave that out then, right?
Yeah, that is my question, and I think that this discussion has answered that, is if the applicant is not proposing landscaping, they are proposing the buffer to be the natural existing state, then they're not required for landscaping to be any certain thing.
Right. But right now, they're proposing that to be equipment and storage
On the east side.
on the east side.
Yeah, and we're just talking about what the Parks and Rec was referencing.
Which was
So see, that's why I think leave it out. So what I'm hearing is basically just leave out F, G, and H. Is that what, summarizing? And I don't think we have any more questions, so.
Well, just to clarify the landscaping, so in the site plan, there's a entryway, nice entryway gate, there's your landscaping. The gravel, there's your landscaping, stuff like that, leave it natural. But, all that consists of way more than 10% of what the code says.
Okay, thank you. So is someone ready to make a motion so that we can discuss it further, if we need to be?
Before we make a motion, I just want to make a comment that I think that this is an unfortunate example of working with an old code that we know is old and outdated, and that we're in the process of updating, but we're still working within the old one. And so we're lacking a lot of definitions and kind of having different issues like water usage fleshed out in like a current time perspective, which I think just makes this like a very complicated application to review and feel like it's really clear cut and you know the answer. So I just want to say thanks to my fellow commissioners for an interesting debate.
I do believe that I support businesses and new businesses coming in and the jobs they create. And I like the quick mitigation too, if there's a fire, say Dolores Mancus or whatever, or Mesa Verde. If we'd had that years ago, we might have had some less of a damage done up there, but that's my opinion. So Patrick, how does one word a motion to include the revised site plan?
Well, currently, it says, our suggested motion is that the commission approve resolution number 6, series 2024, a resolution recommending that city council approve the requested conditional use permit site plan for property located at 1050 Lebanon Road, Cortez, as submitted by Anthony Moore and Mary Lancaster with the following conditions. I think based on your conversation, it sounds like there may be a motion that would come that would include only conditions A, B, C, and D, and E.
And E. Yeah.
And so you could recite that. I would also say that resolution number 6 will need to be amended to reflect that the site plan that is being recommended for approval be as amended by the removal of the buffer, the 30-foot buffer on the east side of the property as stated by the applicant.
Okay. You ready? Go for it.
Okay. I make a motion that the Planning and Zoning Commission approve resolution number 6, series 2024, including the amendments made to the site plan in tonight's meeting. So I make a resolution recommending that City Council approve the requested conditional use permit and site plan with amendments for the property located at 1050 Lebanon Road, Cortez, as submitted by Anthony Moore and Mary Lancaster with the following conditions. Do you want me to read each condition in full?
I think you can just reference the letters as stated in the staff report.
Okay, with the following conditions of approval, A, B, C, D, and E, found in the staff report for this meeting.
Does anybody need clarification on that motion? Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? I'd like to thank everyone for the discussion we've had. Let's proceed to vote. Let's proceed to vote. There was no more.
Bright,
Yes.
Waldron,
Yes.
Tao,
Yes.
Weiss,
Yes.
Remy,
Yes. Motion passes. So being recommended to City Council. Will that be at the next City Council meeting then?
Provided notice yet, so the next available meeting is, Cheryl, I'm looking at you.
November 12th, I think.
Okay. All right, next item, if I can find my agenda. I think it's about, any unfinished business? Hearing none. Any new business? Any other items of business? You got your building permits, you can look those through. And I guess I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
Motion and second to adjourn. Proceed to vote.
Waldron,
Yes.
Tao,
Yes.
Weiss,
Yes.
Bright,
Yes.
Remy.
Yes. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for coming.